In an age of widespread use of experimental therapies in non-traditional medicine and a growing black market for research-grade pharmaceuticals, I'm reminded of the story of dinitrophenol, the OG mitochondrial activator. I was particularly inspired to make this video because a family friend was recently prescribed a mitochondrial activator by a functional medicine doctor, along with a stack of 4 peptides, 3 of which are not approved for human use by the FDA. The mitochondrial activator in question here is a small molecule called SLU-PP332. I'll put together another video to talk about the science behind SLU-PP332, but for now, all you really need to know is that this drug has been studied in just a handful of mouse experiments with no published human data available to understand its safety or efficacy. Zero, zilch, nada. And a search of clinicaltrials.gov as of today shows no current or prior clinical trials for SLU-PP332. So I'll admit, it takes a lot to surprise me anymore in the longevity space, especially after 2 women almost died from peptides being injected in the vendor hall at RADFest last year, which I attended. But I was indeed shocked to realize that a licensed medical professional in the state of Washington was prescribing something like SLU-PP332 based on just a few mouse experiments alone to a 40-something-year-old woman with no major health conditions beyond wanting to lose weight. Not only is that illegal, but it seems grossly irresponsible to me. Now, of course, I recognize there is a large underground community centered largely around peptides, but occasionally veering off into other types of drugs like SLU-PP332 that has, to some extent, normalized the use of experimental unapproved medicines. And that's not meant to be judgmental, it's just a fact. In my mind, however, there's a big difference between a doctor prescribing something like BPC 157, which despite having little quality human data from trials, has a very large preclinical literature and has been used for more than a decade by competitive athletes and functional medicine practitioners, from a doctor prescribing a small molecule like SLU-PP332 with a few animal studies and no human data at all. In any case, this story made me think about dinitrophenol, and I realized most people probably don't know that story. I think it's a pretty compelling example of what can happen when doctors get ahead of evidence and put novelty ahead of patient safety, something that seems to be becoming more fashionable again today. So, it all started back in the 1910s when French munitions manufacturers began using dinitrophenol, or DNP, as an intermediate chemical in the production of explosives. Many of the workers exposed to DNP experienced rapid weight loss. This was often accompanied by excessive sweating, fatigue, and elevated body temperature. The first known death attributed to DNP was an occupational exposure in 1918 in a case report entitled "A Fatal Case of Toxic Jaundice Caused by Dinitrophenol." Following this, the French government recognized the hazard and implemented workplace safety measures to minimize exposure to DNP. And so those measures seemed to work. Not much happened for about a decade, until, beginning in the 1930s, a group of Stanford physicians, led by Maurice Tainter, began studying DNP and published a series of papers on the ability of DNP to induce weight loss, first in mice and then in the clinical setting in humans. And in their 1932 paper, they referred to DNP as a metabolic activator. Now, of course, back then they didn't know that mitochondria were the powerhouses of the cell or that DNP was activating mitochondria specifically. Today, you would probably hear of a drug like DNP be characterized as a mitochondrial activator or an exercise mimetic. What DNP actually is something called a mitochondrial uncoupler because it uncouples electron transport from energy capture in the mitochondria. Basically what DNP does is it carries electrons across the mitochondrial membrane so they don't have to move through the machine that makes ATP. ATP is of course the energy currency of the cell, and that machine is called the ATP synthase. So one analogy would be like turbines in a hydroelectric dam. The turbines are like the ATP synthase, and when water flows through the turbines, it makes electricity, ATP. DNP is like putting a bunch of little holes in the dam, and those holes allow the water to flow past without going through the turbines. So less electricity is produced and more water flows through. The water would be like fat in your body, and the electricity is like ATP. So in the presence of DNP, our cells lack the electricity, the ATP, and they start to burn fat to try to make more ATP. That's why DNP causes weight loss. Our cells burn more fat in a semi-futile effort to make enough ATP. So this would be kind of like if the leaky dam started letting more and more water through the turbines in order to try to power the city. The reservoir behind the dam, your fat stores, would get lower and lower and lower as more and more water flows through. Some through the holes, some through the turbines, just like your fat stores get lower and lower. Now, where this analogy breaks down is that when we burn energy in our mitochondria, those chemical reactions give off heat. And all of the excess mitochondrial activity in people taking DNP leads to elevated body temperature. And when body temperature gets too high, bad things happen. And that's what happened to the French worker who died in 1918. So here, perhaps a better analogy is that DNP is like causing a gas-powered car engine to rev higher and higher and higher when the car is not in gear. You'll burn gas, but you're not going to go anywhere. And if you do this long enough, the engine will get hot enough that it might catch on fire, and the fire might consume the entire car. So why would Tainter and his Stanford colleagues risk killing people by hyperthermia? I mean, the answer is, of course, they didn't understand the mechanism of action, and they didn't really believe that the risks were all that significant. In fact, if you look at the literature, they actively dismissed the evidence of harm. By 1933, they had reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association that metabolism was stimulated by about 50%, and weight loss of up to 1.5 kilograms or about 3.3 pounds per week was possible taking dinitrophenol. In their paper, which was titled Use of Dinitrophenol in Nutritional Disorders, they did note 2 fatal case reports, but dismissed the risk by describing them as the result of, quote, very excessive doses. In fact, they went on to describe those doses as, quote, larger than we have ever used therapeutically, even after months of continuous medication. So they thought that those deaths were just because those people overdosed. They also ignored a third death in a DNP patient taking lower doses, what they would call therapeutic doses, because the patient was a psychiatric patient, did not report a fever, and had an incomplete autopsy. So that dismissal's a little bit harder to justify. Now, based on their work, DNP became widely used by the mid-1930s, with upwards of 100,000 patients reportedly taking the drug. This rapid adoption was possible due to several factors, and I think it's interesting to look at these factors and compare to today. So, first of all, prior to 1938, there was no FDA requirement to show safety prior to marketing. Drugs could be sold immediately after or even concurrent with publication in the medical literature. So this is in some ways kind of similar to what's happening now on the black market with things like SLU, PP332, and other experimental drugs, and FDA choosing not to enforce the requirement for safety. A second factor was that DNP was sold in drugstores and marketed directly to consumer with no prescription required in many states. So there was wide availability to people who wanted it. Again, it's not exactly the same, but this is kind of similar to what we have on the internet now with research-grade chemicals and peptides being widely available, albeit that's in an unenforced black market setting rather than in the drugstore. And then I think the third interesting parallel is there was a massive demand plus commercial amplification. Weight loss without having to do the work. And again, we see similarities to the current promises being made around the miraculous effects of peptides and small molecules like SLU-PP332 and the marketing that's happening on social media, sometimes by pretty well-known influencers. So widespread use of DNP continued for a few years before the dangers really became recognized. But soon, a growing number of reports of serious side effects were being described, including skin lesions, cataracts, and even deaths due to elevated body temperature. This led in 1938 to the FDA making the determination that DNP was, quote, extremely dangerous and not fit for human consumption, banning its sale. And in fact, the DNP experience served as a catalyst for the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is still the foundational piece of legislation upon which FDA regulates medications today. Some of the key changes that were introduced were requiring pre-market safety testing on new drugs, giving the FDA the authority to block unsafe drugs, and shifting the burden of proof to the manufacturers. DNP wasn't the only driver for this. Sulfanilamide was another, but it really was part of this larger shift in philosophy around drugs that we should not rely on early clinical enthusiasm or short-term data to ensure safety. And again, I think it's interesting that today that philosophy, may be shifting back towards the pre-1938 mentality. Okay, so there is another chapter in the DNP story in the 1960s when a doctor named Nicholas Baczynski set up a network of clinics in the southern US and started selling DNP therapy for weight loss. He enrolled about 17,000 patients, and he made a lot of money from this. The FDA actually tried to shut him down, but he basically ignored them, and FDA was largely impotent to stop him. In fact, he kept selling DNP until he was convicted of an unrelated insurance fraud and sent to prison, where he promptly met a guy named Dan Duchaine, who was a notorious promoter of drugs for bodybuilders. He was known as the steroid guru. Once Duchaine got out of prison, he began promoting DNP to the bodybuilding world as the king of fat loss drugs. So we don't really know how many people have died from DNP, and total estimates suggest that it's probably a few hundred, but an exact count is not possible. And even today, some people continue to use low-dose DNP for weight loss, although with the popularization of highly effective and much safer GLP-based drugs, DNP has more or less become obsolete. But I do think it can serve as a useful lesson. And, as I've sort of alluded to, it feels like in recent years there has been a pendulum swing against regulation in favor of looser guardrails and a growing level of comfort among some physicians and consumers to using drugs without much long-term safety data for human use. Or in the case of SLU-PP332, no safety data at all. And while I don't have any reason to believe that SLU-PP332 is going to be as deadly as DNP, it might be. The problem is that we just don't know. So, which brings me to a few final parting thoughts. One, absence of quality data on safety and efficacy does not mean that a drug is safe and efficacious. I know it seems like that should be obvious, but I think many of us put blinders on when it comes to unapproved peptides and other drugs that are popular in certain longevity and functional medicine circles. The wellness blinders, maybe we should call them. Number two, be particularly wary of mitochondrial or metabolic activators or exercise mimetics. There are good mitochondrial medicines, but in general, mucking around with the powerhouses of the cell is risky business, as we learned from DNP. You really want to have quality safety data there. And three, this is just my opinion, but really think hard how well you understand the risk profile if you're going to use an experimental medication, okay? So again, I'm pretty libertarian in my views. I think if people are fully informed, they should have the right to do what they want with their bodies, including experimental medications. It's that fully informed piece. So really think hard about how informed are you? And don't believe some random person on the internet to get your informed consent. So in general, it's helpful to appreciate that these types of drugs are going to be more bioactive than nutritional supplements that you can buy over the counter, which means they have a much higher potential for catastrophic side effects like cataracts or stroke or even death. Now, the absolute risk might be pretty small for you as an individual, but if you're one of the unlucky ones, is that risk worth the payoff for losing a few pounds or gaining a few pounds of muscle? Especially when we actually have pretty good drugs and lifestyle approaches that work. So to sum up, DNP should serve as a cautionary tale for the cavalier use of experimental drugs without sufficient long-term safety data in humans. DNP didn't fail because it didn't work. If anything, it worked too well. It failed because the people prescribing it and the people using it didn't understand the biology well enough. Because physicians got way out ahead of the data, and unfortunately, several people who trusted their physicians to know better died as a result. That's a lesson worth remembering. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below. I would really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button, and please share this episode with any friends or colleagues who you think may benefit from hearing this information. I hope to see you next time on Longevity Science.